Hi, welcome to RedMonk Conversations. I'm Rachel Stevens, and with me today is Zach Lloyd from Warp. Zach is the CEO of Warp. It's a company that I first heard about back in 2022, and at the time they were thinking about the product in terms of reimagining the terminal experience, in particular trying to make it easier for a broader group of developers to use, so it wasn't just a tool for power users, but it was something that everyone could be more effective with and made it easier to learn, less of a steep learning curve. I was impressed at the time, and since then, the market in dev tools has shifted so very substantially that it has pivoted. I don't know if pivot's the right word, but has definitely expanded its scope in some really interesting ways. Zach, I'm so excited to have you here. Tell me about your journey building Warp.
Yeah, so I'm Zach. My background, I've been an engineer for a really long time. The mission of Warp has always been the same. It's to empower developers to ship a better software more quickly. Your sort of preamble on Warp is pretty accurate. Like, we set out with a product vision of trying to reimagine the terminal, with the idea being like, this is a everyday tool for most developers. It's something that from like a product experience, I don't like very much. Like, I just think the stock terminal, people are wasting a ton of time, experiencing a lot of frustration in terms of like how hard it is to use. And conversely, if you get good at using it, you can get a lot more done. The current version of Warp is like similar and different. Like, we basically have taken all the work that we did to make an incredible terminal experience and made it work for agentic development. And so, we don't even call Warp a terminal at this point. It's really, we call it an agentic development environment. And the idea is like, you can have a single interface for telling your computer what to do. You can tell it to do that in terminal commands if you want, and that works really well in Warp. Or you can tell it in natural language, in English. And if you tell it in English, then Warp launches an agent to achieve that task. And because of like where the terminal sits in the development stack, you can do almost any kind of task. So Warp's really, really good at coding. We're one of the top agents on Sweetbench and Terminal Bench, but we're also really good at like setting up projects or debugging in production, or doing stuff with Docker or your clouds. And so it's like a really, really versatile, powerful spot in the stack to be. And like you said, that's like transformed our business, which has been awesome. I would say we were like kind of half right in our original thesis, and just like, I went into this being like, the terminal is like an overlooked piece of real estate. It's kind of like how I would imagine it. And like, our original business model was going to be building collaboration features on top of that. And like, that kind of sort of worked actually. And like, we have traction with that, but we got pretty lucky. Like, this transformational technology came along, like, a couple years into the business, which applies super well to what we're working on. And now, again, we couldn't have really predicted this, but the terminal is sort of like the center of the agentic development universe. Things like Claude Code or Gemini CLI or Warp are like the preferred interface for doing agentic development. So it's been really good for us.
Yeah, I have so many questions. So when you were originally thinking about collaborative terminal, that was like helping team members. Basically, if you have terminal commands, you can share them across your team. Was that the original version?
Yeah, the easiest way to conceive of it is like Postman for your terminal. So Postman is like this API collaboration platform. A lot of that same type of thing applies in the terminal, where it's like you might be executing complicated commands, or you might want to put your on-call playbooks in a place where you can get to from the terminal. We even built like real-time, multiplayer in the terminal, which is very cool, but like not that frequently used. So that was like, and that kind of goes to my background a little. I was principal engineer at Google. I used to run engineering on the Google Docs suite, and I built a lot of Google Sheets. And so as a founder, I think you kind of like do what you know. And that was the thing I like knew how to do. But I think we've been pretty flexible and adapted well to like the fact the market has changed. And like overall, it's been a really positive change in the developer tools market. It's gone from like a market where it's really hard to make money, where it's like you have some of the fastest growing startups in history are in this market now, which is cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a profound shift in the I won't pay for any developer tools ever to I will pay $200 a month for some developer tools. Like it's been.
Here's the thing. It's like, I don't even think of the market as like developer tools. I think that's the wrong framing for it. It's like,
how do you think about it?
I think it's the market for automating the production of software. Like that's like,
fair. Okay. Yeah.
That's where this is going. Because like, look, there is a developer tools aspect in terms of like a lot of what these tools do, Warp included, is they help your developers be more productive. But I think the really, really big opportunity is like, if you look at like the market for the production of software, and that could
Hmm.
be enterprise software, consumer software. And I think I think the more interesting part is enterprise, honestly, not like the long tail of like vibe coded websites, but like that's a huge, huge cost to companies and also like a huge economic driver. And we're getting to the point where big pieces of that can be, can be automated, whether it's like, you still need developers in the loop. So it's not like total automation, but pieces of it are going to be totally automated. And that's just like a gigantic economic opportunity.
Absolutely. So when we're thinking about where you envisioned collaboration kind of being human to human collaboration, team
Yeah.
collaboration, how did that kind of translate into building agentic tooling? Because it's still collaboration, but like in a very different flavor of collaboration.
Yeah. So
Like,
actually, the
are there
pieces
parallels or no?
there are like, so the thing that we built on the collaboration side, which we call Warp Drive, is like this knowledge store. And the original concept was like you and your teammates can put organizational knowledge into it that's useful for using the terminal. And like now all that knowledge is just available to our agents. So that's like one very obvious thing, which is really cool. So if you have this corpus of commands or notebooks or environment variables, or these days like shared prompts or whatever, the
Yeah.
agent now, like we set it up so you can do RAG over that, and the agent just understands your context way better. So we have that in addition to MCP, and just like having the ability also to like share MCP. We have the ability to like share rules. So all of these things that make agents not just work for individuals and work for companies as part of our collaboration story. But I think what you're asking is like, you actually, as a developer now, the way you develop software is you kind of collaborate with an agent. And the stuff that's actually more useful for that we've built has to do with like how we change the user experience in the terminal itself. And so in Warp, like we have the terminal session isn't just like a stream of text. We've essentially made it something that's much more like like a chat experience where it's like the user says something, the agent responds, the agent does tool calls. Those tool calls can actually have like rich renderings, meaning like you can see like an actual diff. If you want to go and edit that diff, you can edit it. And so just the fact that we put all this effort into making the terminal
Mhm.
interface something that we own gives us this huge advantage when it comes to other tools that run in the terminal, which are just like plain old text-based apps, and you can't do any of these things with them. So that's led us, I think, to have a very differentiated offering in this space compared to everything else out there, which is either like a VS Code fork or it's a pure text-based app. And Warp is
Yeah.
like, no, we're like an actual like native GUI app that has like some of the best parts of the terminal. Like it has that interface, that form factor, but we can also do things like code editing or code review or whatever we want with the UI in the terminal.
So that sounds kind of like a lightweight IDE embedded in the terminal. Is that the way to think about it?
So we call it an ADE. We are
Okay.
attempting to create this category of agentic development environment where our position on this is like neither the IDE nor the regular terminal is the right interface for doing agentic development. The way that development is happening is fundamentally changed. And what you want is something that is designed from the ground up to support that workflow. And like it's going to have aspects of the terminal for sure, but it also has aspects of the IDE, but it's not an IDE because in the IDE, like the primary interface that you have looks like Microsoft Word for editing your coding files. And like, it's really geared towards hand editing.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, no shade to Microsoft Word, but like hand editing, handwriting code is not the primary thing that developers are going to be doing. So having an entire interface dedicated to that doesn't make sense. It's like
Right.
the secondary action. And so the primary action should be prompting an agent. I think like the secondary actions that you really want to support are like reviewing the agent's code. So actually, if you're like, I think code review becomes much more important, and not like code review like in GitHub or whatever, but code review in the inner loop as the agent is writing code. And then if you need to, having the ability to go and edit that code. But that's, like I said, that should be your fallback. That shouldn't be what the primary interface is geared towards.
Interesting. So when you're thinking about your competitive set, then are you kind
Yeah.
of thinking more of like the AI CLI tools, or is it like the AI kind of IDE tools, or is it a mix of both? It's all of them?
It's all of them because like
Okay.
it's like whatever tool someone's adopting to build software by prompt or to
Hmm.
build software automatically. And there's different interface approaches to it. Like there are the AI CLIs like Cloud Code, and there's the AI IDEs like Cursor. I would just think of the competitive set in terms of like what you can do with the tool, not what the
Hmm.
interface is. And so in Warp, you can you can code. Like I said, it's really, really good at coding. We also, again, one thing I think we're much better at or better positioned for than like the AI IDEs is doing all this other stuff that goes on in the software lifecycle, like figuring out why a server is crashing or like setting up Terraform or like, interacting with your AWS. You would never want to do that through an IDE. So that is our competitive set, but we are like, in a sense, even broader in terms of what
Yeah.
functions you can do beyond just coding.
Interesting. I like the concept of what the code can or what the tool can do versus the form factor of the tool. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be increasingly shifting in the next little bit. So talk to me about how you are building context for Warp. I know you mentioned that you can do RAG over Warp Drive, but like what are the primary places in which Warp is kind of deriving all of its information?
Yeah, so there's a lot of them. So there's like there's code-based context is one thing I think is important. Actually, not every tool invests in this, but we do, like, we vectorize the code bases and do embeddings on them, and have empirically found that that actually increases efficiency by finding things more quickly in search for some use cases than just like grabbing over the code. So code-based context is one. Another big one is just like the fact that we're in the CLI, and like CLI tool calling is such a like it's such a wide surface of things that you can bring into the context window by executing a CLI command. So that's probably our number one way of doing it is like, okay, if you want to like understand like your G-Cloud setup, just like have the Vorp run a G-Cloud command and ask about the servers. So there's all this context gathering on demand for that. There is MCP. So we're, fully supporting MCP and actually trying to make the MCP experience in Warp really nice and work not just for individuals, but work for teams. Because like MCP has this like activation energy, which is annoying. There's stuff like rules, which is another big one. So you can do that on like a per project basis, or you can do it through our collaboration platform and get it globally. And that's like, that kind of gets you most of everything. Through those tools, again, and Warp is super flexible. You can do web searches, you can attach screenshots. So like that's other stuff that we're looking at too, is just like how do you what are all the tools that you can bring in context. But it's like a pretty rich set of things that you can bring into the agent. And then the other thing that we do a bunch of work on is like, with all that context, how do you present it efficiently so that the agent is looking at just the right stuff at the right time? There's a lot of work that goes into the harness there, whether it's like summarizing context, doing sub agents, truncating long context, using different models for different types of things. So that's like another place where we spend a lot of time working.
Interesting. There's so many ways we could go with that, but I
Yeah,
do
go
don't want
wherever you want.
I don't want to derail us too much. I'm curious how you're thinking about the vision of just agentic development overall. What do you see coming
Yeah.
together here?
Yeah, so I think that there's like three phases of development, roughly is how I see it. So there's what I've done for most of my career, which I conceive of as developing by hand. In that flow, I'm like opening a code editor and typing code and then opening a terminal and running commands. I think we're transitioning from that into developing by prompt. And like, I think we're really early into this, despite all the hype. Like the use cases where development by prompt is most successful for is what you would think of as like vibe coding. And it's really like, building websites or web apps. It's kind of like the successor to Squarespace or WordPress, in my opinion. And like for professional context, we're still very early in agentic development. But in agentic development, it's like you're opening a tool like Warp, or as a developer, telling the computer what you want to do. And that could be building a feature or fixing a bug. And then I think there's the third phase, which is like automated development. And we're interested in that as well. With that, like there's different approaches. So there's like the approach that we're doing, which is basically trying to provide developers with programmable versions of our agents so that they can, have the agent do some amount of their work on their own. And that would be like we just did a hackathon on this. And for instance, having an agent that automatically updates your documentation based on every code change is like, I think, a canonical example. And so we're providing a version of Warp where you don't have to sit there in front of Warp typing into it and like watch it run locally. Instead, you can program it to handle triggers or run on crons or respond to system events and do some portion of either code writing or just honestly, it could be any like developer task. All of the stuff that we have in Warp's coding agent is really useful. So yeah, those are the three phases. By hand, it's these interactive agents, and then it's like automating parts of the development workflow using agents.
And so like the concept of the asynchronous background running agent, I think is compelling to me because in a lot of my experiences trying to play with agent workflows, like I end up kind of being like the XKCD comic about the compiler. It's like, I'm just waiting for the agent to run. Better go have
Yeah,
like a sword fight in the hall. Like, it's like, I don't want to lose my flow. But I also like, so I end up just waiting. And that is
totally.
clearly not the efficient way to do it. So it's like, we've got to keep
It's the
moving
new
to that
compiling.
next phase.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
really is.
Yeah, yeah.
So for me, it's fun to just kind of hear people's visions on how this all comes together. Because I think, as you said, we're still really early in this phase of trying to figure out how all these workflows get incorporated.
Totally. Yeah. And like from a business perspective, I think automation is the best. It's just like productivity improvements are hard to measure, but if you can just be like sell automations or sell a piece of developer infrastructure where they can build these automations, which is how we're thinking about it at Warp, then it's more outcome oriented and you can charge in a different way. And it's just like easier to measure the value. So I do think that's where it's going.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your pricing? Because I know you're not doing tokens, right?
We do a credit system.
Okay.
The pricing for all these tools is very complicated, but
It
like for
really
us,
is.
you get there's our basic pricing plan is you buy a fixed number of credits and that recurs every month and that's a subscription. And if you exhaust the number of credits, you have the option to go onto a pay-as-you-go model where you
Mhm.
can just like buy credits a la carte. That's okay. It's like I don't know I would be lying if I said exactly I knew the right way to do this. Token pricing, I'm like a little bit against from a like business model perspective, just because it makes it very hard for us as we improve the efficiency of the model to capture any of those gains. If it's just like raw tokens that we're charging for. Like if we do something, like I think we should be incentivized as a company to make the interactions more token efficient. And if we're just like passing through token costs or not. And so that's the reason I don't like that model very much. I do think some sort of consumption-based pricing is like pretty important. Otherwise, it's just
Or else you
like
get eaten alive.
what's that?
Otherwise,
Yeah,
you get
you
eaten
just end up
alive.
spending so much money. It's
Yes,
very hard to
absolutely.
price the fixed request plans in a way that's incentive aligned without some sort of consumption based pricing, because otherwise,
Yeah.
like we end up just like losing more money. The more people use our AI, and what we want to be in a position is like we make more money as they use it more. So that's like a consumption model. But yeah, it's messy for sure.
I love hearing people's general philosophies on all these things, where we're going, how we price it. Like all of these things are all still so up in the air right now that it's just interesting to hear how people are approaching it and what they're finding works and doesn't work.
Totally.
Wonderful. Well, is there anything I didn't think to ask about? So like I don't want to make you pitch, but like if somebody is looking at Warp versus like a cursor, like why would someone want to use Warp versus like one of the AI tools that they're already using? What's their switch point?
Great question. So the way that we're trying to differentiate is really on the developer experience, meaning like when you go in to try to build something with agents, we want Warp to be the easiest to use. We want our agents to be the highest quality. We want to give you the features that really let you see what the agent is doing and control it and review it. We're really focused on working on real code bases. Like we're not positioning ourselves as a vibe coding tool. And so if you like using Claude Code or Gemini CLI, if you like that way of working, you should strongly consider Warp, because it's a similar style of working, but with what I consider a much better developer experience, and like similar, it's not more expensive really. It's like maybe like it's comparable cost wise, but just like from a product and usability standpoint, that's like my DNA, what I really care about. And so when you come in, you should just be able to get more done and have like more fun and doing it in Warp.
Wonderful. Well, Zach, thank you so much for carving time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule as a CEO to
I'm
talk to
very
me.
busy. Yeah. So
But
this is fine. This is
I
cool.
appreciate it though.
For sure.
This has been great. And if you have anyone who wants to look up Warp or look up you, where should they go?
Just go to warp.dev. You don't need to look me up. If you want, I'm on LinkedIn.
Fair enough.
I'm writing my thoughts on LinkedIn, but that's like the social channel that I'm most on. I'm not very good at Twitter, but just go to warp.dev, check out the product, and we have a preview build too for people who want to get the early access to stuff. So, but just go check it out.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Rachel.